Chief of Defense Staff vows that the military will avenge death of 22 slain military personnel as they are laid to rest in Abuja. We have not declared war on Nigerians, Ecowas president says, as he insists that there is no plan to invade Niger. And we'll begin on a solemn note as 22 of the 36 military personnel who died on the 14th of August 2023 during an ambush by bandits and helicopter crash in Niger State were laid to rest today in Abuja in the presence of the ministers of defense and the service chiefs. The burial was done in adherence with military protocol while family members of the deceased watched in tears. The Chief of Defense Staff reiterated to the families the resolve of the military to ensure that the deaths of these military personnel are avenged. Take a listen.
To the bandits, terrorists, and perpetrators of violence who seek to sow division and fear among our people, know this: our resolve will not waver. We will hunt you down. We will bring you to justice, and we will restore peace and security to every corner of our nation. Your actions may cause pain and suffering, but they will never extinguish the spirit of unity and resilience that burns within us. Today, as we lay our fallen heroes to rest, let us remember that their sacrifice serves as a reminder of the price of freedom. Let us honor their memory by striving for a Nigeria where no man's lives are lost in the pursuit of peace.
Well, President of Ecowas, Omar Toure, has made it clear that there will be no war against Niger Republic. He says that Ecowas has only activated a scale of sanctions, which include legitimate force, and is hopeful that all diplomatic efforts will yield positive results from the military junta in Niger. Now, according to Mr. Toure, Ecowas, however, rejects the 3-year transition and is urging the military to return to civilian rule as soon as possible. And concerning the 7-day ultimatum initially given by Ecowas, Mr. Toure says at no time did Ecowas indicate that it would deploy the use of force at the expiration of the ultimatum.
The decision of heads of state and government has been taken out of context. This is what we refer to. We say all measures which may include the use of force, and now only the use of force was extracted and then blown up. So this is why we are saying it is taken out of proportion. The use of force is still on the table as provided for by ECOWAS instruments. These instruments are old instruments, as you will see, as you have heard me say. They date as far back as the 2000s, the 1990s, and these instruments have been subscribed to by all ECOWAS member states, including the Republic of Niger. So if we have no problem with the instruments, we should not have any problem with the implementation of the instruments.
Well, with that, it's time for your daily political roundup.
The Julius Abure-led group of Labour Party is debunking claims by the Lamidia Papa group of the party that the appeal court has affirmed Lamidia Papa as the national chairman of the Labour Party. Addressing a news conference in Abuja, the national secretary of the group, Omar Farouk, insists Abure remains the national chairman of the Labour Party and Senator Ethan Achonu is the right party governorship candidate in Imo State.
The appeal court in Edo has since ruled that Abure is the authentic chairman of the Labour Party, and anything done under his leadership, including nominating candidates for election, is legal.
Crisis appears to be brewing in the All Progressives Congress as members of the party from Cross River State have rejected the zoning of the position of National Woman Leader previously occupied by the state to Edo State. Addressing journalists in Abuja, the state chairman of the party, Alfonso Zegba, says the recent announcement to fill vacant National Working Committee and zonal positions of the party negates the principles of natural justice, as the positions of National Woman Leader had always been shared by Cross River and Rivers State.
To inform him of this infraction, we have also written to Mr. President to say that the National Woman Leader position is commonly shared between Cross River and Akwa Ibom. Edo and Delta presently have an NWC position which is the National Public Secretary.
The Election Petition Tribunal sitting in Umuahia, the Abia State capital, has dismissed a suit against the Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, Ben Kalu. In a judgment by the three-man tribunal headed by Justice Samson Paul, the panel dismissed the petition of the candidate of the Action Alliance, Ifeanyi Igbokwe. The tribunal had earlier dismissed the petition filed by the candidate of the Liberal Party, Frank Chinasa, in the February 25 Bende federal constituency elections in Abia State. A socio-political group in Kaduna State, the Southern Kaduna Renewed Movement of Nigeria, is calling on President Bola Tinubu to appoint a minister from the zone and give the people in the area a sense of belonging. The coordinator of the group, Yusuf Kahu, made the appeal at a news conference in the state capital, Kaduna. A political group known as Youth Alliance for Tinubu and Shatima has described as unfounded the allegations that the Chief of Staff to President Bola Tinubu, Femi Gbajabiamila, collected money from some individuals to favor them with political appointments. The group at a news conference in Abuja says those accusing the former Speaker of the House of Representatives have failed to provide evidence to back up their claims.
All these cheap allegations are unfounded and mere blackmail just to create some unnecessary fracas in some quarters. We totally want to debunk this in its entirety and advise the public to be aware.
Now, the NBA president, that's the Nigeria Bar Association, was at the presidential villa yesterday to see President Bola Tinubu. He applauded the president for the appointment of Mr. Lateef Fagbemi as the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation. The NBA president, Mr. Yakubu Mekiao, is my guest tonight as we try to set an agenda for the new Minister of Justice. Mr. Mekiao, welcome to Politics Today.
Thank you very much, Terry. Thank you for having me.
Finally happy that we can have you on this.
I'm grateful to be here.
So I see that you were with the president yesterday. You had a chat with journalists when you stepped out to talk about how you think that the president made the right choice with Mr. Lateef Fagbemi. So talk to us briefly about that meeting just before we go into our discussion and details about the Ministry of Justice.
Okay, so we had the privilege of meeting with Mr. President Ahmed Bola Tinubu, GCFR, Commander-in-Chief of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, yesterday. And essentially it was to express our profound gratitude to Mr. President for the choice of illustrious members of the Nigerian Bar Association to serve in this administration. You would remember that the Chief of Staff to the President is a lawyer, National Security Advisor is a lawyer. There are also lawyers that have been appointed as ministers. And the crescendo really is the appointment of Prince Lateef Fagbemi as the Attorney General of the Federation. And also the President has graciously accepted to come to declare open the 63rd Annual General Conference of the Nigerian Bar Association. So it's only deserving that we meet with the President. He graciously gave us the appointment to see him, and essentially was to express our profound gratitude to him for the choice of our members to serve in his administration. And even the scope, the State Chief of Protocol is equally a lawyer. Nigerian Bar Association, grateful to the President. We are proud of the choices that he has made, and we believe that those choices will translate into value to not only the Nigerian Bar Association, but to Nigerians at large. So essentially, that was what we went to see the President for.
Very well then. Now, the new Minister of Justice has a lot of tasks ahead of him. There are a lot of responsibilities that he's going to take on. Nigerians have huge expectations coming from the immediate past Minister of Justice, who many believe wrongly advised the president, especially on matters of rule of law. And on several occasions, I know that even the NBA had to make a statement or two regarding that. So while we prepare to begin to speak about the responsibilities ahead of him, I know you had talked about the need for judicial reforms, which is highly important. Let's talk about this man, Lateef Fagbemi. You have high expectations of him, and you believe in him so much. And I've also seen a statement from Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, who also says that Mr. Lateef Fagbemi will deliver. But then I think Nigerians would like to know, what is it about this man? What are his antecedents that give you so much hope and belief in him?
So number one, I think it's apt to use that very common expression that Prince Lateef Fagbemi is simply a round peg in a round hole. Now, I say this in terms of his capacity, in terms of his intellect, in terms of his humility and accessibility. And I have watched this gentleman for over 30 years. I am privileged to have been called to the bar 33 years ago. And each time I met this gentleman in court, I left with an impression. Someone who is gentle but firm, someone who understands the art of persuading the court in order to put across his argument. But beyond all of this, what is most important for me, and that is why I believe that the president made a wonderful choice, a great choice at that, is that this is a man that has conducted himself with candor, professionalism, and you can talk about the character of Lateef Fagbemi. And that is why it is not difficult for such a gentleman to convey his intellect from one point to the other, because it doesn't matter how smart you are, it does not matter how cerebral you are, if you do not have the necessary character, which is the value that would convey that intellect, the resourcefulness, from one point to the other and translate to value to the people that you have called to serve. And you see, this is someone that is quite generous at heart to his colleagues, to his community, and he has used his private practice to touch lives across the country. So, for someone who has done that from his life as a private practitioner, now ascending into the office of the Attorney General of the Federation, it means that when he brings to bear these qualities into that office, it's going to translate to value to the entire country. How do I mean? By the single advice that Prince Lateef Fagbemi will give to Mr. President, when implemented, will impact every inch of this country. And so it is not difficult for us as his colleagues, and one with whom I've done several matters together, so I've worked very closely with him. I know his kind of person. I know the strength of his character. He may appear gentle, but he's quite a firm person. And he's somebody that I believe, without being rude to the president, he would insist that the right things be done. That is the person that we have in Prince Lateef Fagbemi, Attorney General. And that is why the bar is grateful to Mr. President. Mr. President has not made a wrong choice. We are proud of Prince Lateef Fagbemi, and that is why I would not miss saying it. And I don't regret, I don't apologize to anyone, no apologies at all, that the Nigerian Bar Association under my leadership will throw its weight behind Lateef Fagbemi to support the discharge of his responsibilities, constitutional responsibilities, to advance the cause of this country through this administration.
Very well. One of the things you want him to do is just judicial reforms.
Yeah.
In details, what do you expect him to do in that regard?
Well, you cannot give details of judicial reform in a moment like we have to share with you. But you can talk about it from the institutions that are actually responsible for the dispensation of justice, justice administration. The police, for instance, they have the constitutional responsibility of dealing with issues of crime, prevention of crime, protection of lives and properties. And where there is an infraction of any of the provisions of the law, it is the responsibility of the police to investigate the conduct, the alleged conduct of the person who was alleged to have committed an offense, and then begin to prepare the process of bringing such a person to book. Now, you have that in place. How have we dealt with the police force? Have we actually done what we are supposed to do for the police to properly equip them to discharge that onerous responsibility? Because every citizen is presumed innocent until the contrary is proved. So it's a Herculean task for an investigator, and it costs a lot of money. But have we prepared them in terms of the trainings, in terms of the equipment? And look at the sophistry of the times that we live today. Would you say that the Nigerian police is properly equipped in terms of the human resource and the equipment to discharge their responsibility? Look at the welfare of the police.
Can we talk about it from the aspect of the function of the judiciary, in this case, the Minister of Justice?
Yeah, so I'm coming there. That's why you said, you asked me to talk about the details. So it starts from there, before it comes to the court, the judiciary. And the judiciary is not only just concerned about matters that come from the police. There are also aspects of the civil jurisdiction of the courts and
human rights and all.
Exactly, the human rights and all. And human rights would be a situation where someone, an individual or an institution, is alleged to have violated the human rights of any citizens or any person. And if there is a dispute arising from that, the courts will determine. But how much have we also done for the courts? How much have we done for the judiciary? One thing that remains an emergency in this country, number one, is the salaries and allowances of judicial officers. And I have said it times without number, that it seemed to me, and it appears that we have avalanche of evidence to support the fact that successive governments have decided to keep the judiciary where it's been since 2007, Terry, without a review of their salaries and allowances. Look at the concrete economic realities today, the inflation. And to know that a justice of the Supreme Court, for instance, receives 750,000 naira his salaries every month. Where would that take him to within the concrete economic realities in this country? Have you walked into the chambers of any of the justices of the Supreme Court to see the load of work that they have to do? Imagine that all matters that come from the High Court, Federal High Court, National Industrial Court, in certain cases, they end up at the Supreme Court. And they have to deal with all the issues. And for them to appreciate what they have to deal with at the Supreme Court, they must have an understanding of what happened at the trial court, the Court of Appeal, and that court. In most cases, you come with volumes of documents. They go through that, distill all the facts. You collect 750,000. And you expect that such judicial officers or such persons whose responsibilities are not being acknowledged in any way, and no effort is being made to cater for them. Imagine the kind of debts that the Supreme Court and, of course, the entire judiciary suffered recently. Justices of the Supreme Court, Court of Appeal will just drop and die. One of them at the Court of Appeal just rose from the court, went into the chambers, and that was all. Look at, the justices of the Supreme Court, Justice Umweze, Unguta, all of these wonderful people that have sacrificed their lives for this nation. And make no mistake, Terry, the reason we have a country today is because of the work of the judiciary. The statements coming from the courts, the decisions that they have resolved. We may not be happy with the courts, with the way things have happened, but Terry, it takes two to tango. But the judiciary is one institution of government that has been responsible for keeping this country together. And I'll give you an example of something very people-centered that the Supreme Court did just of recent with the Naira redesign. The Supreme Court, in spite of the fact that they've been neglected by successive governments, they looked at that situation. And by the way, let me say this at the risk of sounding immodest. It was the case that was filed before the Supreme Court was based on a letter that we wrote as NBA, the governor of Central Bank, after wide consultations with stakeholders about how inhumane that policy was. We wrote to the CBN governor, we wrote to the Minister of Finance, we sought to see the CBN governor at that time. He wouldn't see us. We were only able to see the Minister of Finance. And eventually that document was the basis upon which that matter was filed before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court rendered a decision that everybody applauded. Now, you may not have seen the impact of other decisions in this manner, but I guarantee you for every decision that the Supreme Court or any court decides, delivers, it carries that kind of impact in the society. And in spite, let me conclude this, in spite of the fact that they've been neglected, and you remember that there was Executive Order 10, which sought to give some sort of palliative to the judiciary. When we talked about the independence of the judiciary, the executive holding what belongs to them and all, the Supreme Court, in a show of their strength of character, even though that order was meant to give them something, they said no. We would rather get something that comes to us constitutionally and lawfully. They struck down that order, in spite of the way they've been pauperized over the years. So that is something that has to be done as a matter of urgency.
Okay, let's look at some other aspects that the Minister of Justice would have to tackle.
Yeah.
And one of them is the speed of justice delivery.
Exactly.
How would you advise him to go about this?
So it's not just about the Minister of Justice. It's about all of us that are called to the business of the administration of justice. And we cannot talk about the Attorney General in isolation from the courts and in isolation from those of us who are in private practice. I give you a clear example, and that is why legislation may be necessary in this regard. But beyond legislation, there is the need for the change of our attitude. And that can only happen if we discharge our responsibilities as ministers in the temple of justice, motivated by the desire to do justice. So, I give you an example. There was a time in this country when election petition matters or electoral matters stayed in court, and the tenure for which that dispute arose would be run out before the matter was concluded. The decision was taken through constitutional amendment. Time was set, limited for the determination of those matters. Those same counsel that appear for parties at the time when there was no time limit now appear before the same courts, conducted the same electoral related matters, same principles of law, and they would conclude those matters in 180 days at the trial, conclude at the Court of Appeal in 60 days, either at the Court of Appeal or at the Supreme Court. So you could see that it is not impossible for us to conclude these matters in record time. We have to change our attitude. And the reason we see most of these delays in courts is because we are motivated by other factors other than the desire to see justice done in the case that you are called to do.
But in all these, does the Minister of Justice have a role in any way to play in ensuring the speedy dispensation of justice?
He does. For instance, that's why I talked about legislation. The Minister of Justice can begin to consider the possibility of reforms, legislative reforms. Maybe a Civil Justice Act, like we had the Criminal Administration of Criminal Justice Act, and which the different states have now also adopted. Putting measures in place to ensure speedy disposal of criminal cases. We can do something likewise for administration of civil justice, so that commercial disputes don't stay in court longer than necessary. That can come through legislative reforms and spearheaded by the Honorable Attorney General.
So that brings me to the open letter which Dr. Olisa Agbakuba wrote to the Minister of Justice on sort of an agenda that he expects him to look out for. And it's with regard to the administration of criminal justice. He believes that there must be some unbundling of the anti-graft agencies which have duplicate responsibilities.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I do, absolutely. I watched the screening of the ministers, and when the Honorable Attorney General spoke, that was something that he mentioned, and he caught my attention. Because by the time you combine the investigative powers with the prosecutorial powers, the prosecutor, the tendency for the prosecutor to turn to a persecutor is very high, because I was the one that investigated, and then I'm the one to prosecute. I want to make sure that I secure a conviction. And so I do all that I must do to secure conviction, but that is not the responsibility of a prosecutor. A prosecutor is one person who by law is under a duty where he finds any evidence that can help the defendant that he is prosecuting to exculpate him from that alleged offense. He has a statutory duty to make that evidence available to him.
You know, this position is shared by Dr. Agbakuba, who believes that an agency like the AFCC should be unbundled to only investigate and not prosecute. However, today, the Ecowas agency, GIABA, which is an intergovernmental action group against money laundering in West Africa, recommends that the anti-graft agencies should be empowered to prosecute.
Well, that is their view, and they're entitled to their opinion. But we are the ones in the field. We are the ones that understand the practicalities of these things. I've never done anything since I was called to the bar other than to be in court. So I understand the workings of the prosecution. Even as a private practitioner, I've had fiats in the past to prosecute criminal matters. So they're entitled to their opinion, and it's an opportunity for us to sit down and engage with ourselves and find out what is best for us as a nation. But we must begin to consider distributing all of these responsibilities in such a way that what the investigator does when it comes to the point of prosecution, I mean, you are not insisting. And that way, the investigator makes sure that he does all that he needs to do. And by the way, investigation costs a lot of money, and it takes time in most cases. Depending on the type of the crime that is being alleged. So enough of resources must be made available. Time must be given, enough of arrest of defendants or suspects before you commence investigation. It is wrong. It is unconstitutional. It is not right. So, but you could see that it's because of the merger of these responsibilities, and that is why everyone that is given any job, Terry, wants to be seen to succeed. And so if you are not careful, if you are wrongly motivated in the discharge of your responsibility, and I say here that if justice is not what you are looking at, if you simply want to satisfy your ego, or if you want to satisfy your boss, there is no way you stay within the bounds of law to discharge your responsibility.
When we come back from a break, I will quickly take you up on constitutional reforms that you expect that the Minister of Justice should champion, and also talk about the NBA and your time in office as NBA President.
Thank you, Terry.
We'll take a quick break, and when we return, we'll conclude the discussion with the NBA President, Mr. Yakubu Mekiao. We'll move on to other things. So stay with us. Welcome back to Politics Today. I'm still speaking with the NBA President, Mr. Yakubu Mekiao. Mr. Mekiao, just before we wrap up the conversation on setting the agenda for the Minister of Justice, I had talked to you about the need for constitutional reforms, and some of it would have to be with regard to jurisdiction of states. state courts, especially with regard to cases that concern them. Is this a constitutional reform that you think that the Minister of Justice should pursue?
Well, offenses that are within the remit or jurisdiction of the state courts would be the business of the state houses of assembly. And so the attorneys general in the state will have to consider those reforms within the limits of their states. The ones that impact the entire federation, for which come within the ambit of the Attorney General's office, is something that the Honorable Attorney General will be concerned with at the jurisdictions of the federal courts. And it's important here to begin to consider limiting the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court.
Okay, let's talk about the Supreme Court now, especially with regard to your comments made earlier in the year about lawyers criticizing judgments of the Supreme Court, specifically the Lawan Mechina case. And I recall that one of the two lawyers, one the senior advocate of Nigeria, Femi Falana, and the other, Chidiodin Kalu, said that, well, I think Femi Falana said you were trying to, in his own words, silence Nigerian lawyers. And Odin Kalu felt that what you said had no bearing. And they didn't see why the court judgments could not be, questioned by lawyers.
Yes. So, the legal profession is a profession that is regulated. And it has rules of professional conduct. As a professional, you must be measured in the way you speak. And I will just give you a typical example of how the public actually sees lawyers, so that we appreciate the sort of influence that we have over people. And that way, we'll be careful how we speak, and that is expected of us as professionals. That is why we cannot speak about the decisions of court in a certain manner, in a manner that would incite the public against the institution of justice. And it is also unprofessional to make personal attacks to the persons of judicial officers. In my village, Terry, I went home one day and a woman, once she sighted me, she started telling her daughter to go bring her son, who was named Barrister, because they called me Barrister. Fast forward to when I became a son. So in my village now, I have one young man that is named Barrister. Also another young man that is now named Son. There are people who don't know the import of the decisions of court, the binding nature of the decisions of court, whether you are happy with the decisions or not. There are people who see you as a lawyer from their village as having the final say concerning any matter. And so how you talk about the decisions of the court is of utmost importance.
But can lawyers openly disagree with court judgments?
You have a means of disagreeing with the judgments of court. If you have a decision of the High Court that you are not happy with, you don't come to Channels Television and begin to tell Terry how that judge was wrong. It's unprofessional. All of the things that we have to do is within an order. That is a structure that is provided for us to do it. If the Supreme Court, which is the final court of the land, renders a decision, if you are a scholar, talk about it. Go and do an analysis. But don't come and be making insinuations to the effect that the court was compromised. That was why they came to that position. What you are doing is not helping the system. You are destroying the institution. You are destroying the platform upon which the persons who are the players of the administration of justice at that point in time, at this point in time, are standing to discharge their responsibility. Once the platform is destroyed, the institution is destroyed, even when you now bring people you believe have what it takes from your own opinion to occupy that office, the public would have lost confidence in the institution. And nothing that comes from that institution would be accepted by the public. And so we have a responsibility to be guided, to be guarded, and to be measured in the way we talk about the judgments of the courts. And all of them that you mentioned, they understand what they need to do. They do understand what they need to do. I'm not saying that lawyers shouldn't talk about, but you don't go to the televisions. And many times I've had interviews where lawyers came to channels, television, or other media to say that they haven't even read the decision of the court.
Well, just before we go, because we're out of time, I need to switch to the next conversation now. Some question how you're leading the NBA, especially with regard to the elections, your comments on the elections and your assessment of the elections, and then comparing that to the Election Union Observer reports that came out. How do you respond to those who believe that the EU did a better job than the NBA?
You know, Terry, it was you that conducted that interview with me in the office. At the risk of sounding immodest, I'm not a frivolous person. I am not. I had all of those comments. But my comment was based on empirical evidence. Nigerian Bar Association deployed 1,000 observers across the country. Across the country. I don't know how many EU observers have been deployed across the country. And in the form that we curated for the report by our observers, we also have columns where you would, as an observer, tell us if you saw any EU or any international or foreign observer at your polling units. Terry, I received reports from our observers, those that turned in their report. Not less than 600 of those that turned in their reports. And by the way, for every report that we received till date, we can tell you the geolocation of the person who sent that report, and also give you statistics or details of the device that he used. So we leveraged on technology. Right. That came real time. 20% of those who turned in their reports said the election was excellent. 67% of those who turned in the report said that it was satisfactory. If you add 20 to 67, and EU, how many polling units did they go to? Now, how can we now elevate the report of 50 people against? Let us look at the statistics of what they did.
We would have to have a longer conversation, but I'd like to thank you very much for your time on Politics Today, Mr. Yakubu Meikiao, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, President of the Nigerian Bar Association.
I thank you for having me, but Terry, can I say something before I leave?
Quickly, please.
The Nigerian Bar Association is holding its 63rd Annual General Conference. It is themed Getting It Right, charting the course for Nigeria's nation building. We have to get it right in this country, and the Nigerian Bar Association is determined to lead that path, to lead that fight, because it's our responsibility to guide the people and advance the cause of this nation. I invite you to that.
We'll talk again after that conference.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry, for having me.
Now, the National Working Committee of the New Nigeria People's Party, in a statement signed by the acting national chairman, Malam Abakau Ali, and read by the national auditor, Ladipo Johnson, a couple of days ago, stated that the founder of the party, Dr. Boniface Okechukwu Anyebunam, and the National Publicity Secretary, Dr. Agbo Major, pending the determination of investigations by the disciplinary committee at the national level of the party, are suspended. But the National Publicity Secretary of the party, Agbo Major, denied report about the suspension, describing it as a huge comic show. So now I am joined by the National Auditor and Chairman. Let me begin with Mr. Agbo Major. So Mr. Agbo Major is joining us virtually now. He is a suspended National Publicity Secretary of the NNPP. Good evening, Mr. Major.
Yeah, good evening, Terry. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So you are in the eye of the storm right now following your suspension. So let me ask you, why do you think that your suspension by the NNPP NWC is a joke?
Well, that's a very interesting question. First, let me let you know, and then to also let viewers know that the NNPP is a political party that has a constitution that guides its operations. And the procedures are there, for actions to be taken. First, if there are infractions, maybe somebody is found to have infringed on the provisions of the constitution, and then there is need for sanctions or whatever, the appropriate thing to do are laid out clearly in the constitution. And so what they did, so the purported suspension of myself and then the founder of the party, who graciously, without any strings tied, gave them this party, gave them an opportunity to be able to run on it for the 2023 election. What they have done, I can tell you, is not in consonance with the provisions of our constitution. And that's why it is difficult for anybody to, convince us that there is anything that has any semblance of suspension that has been properly done. And then come to think of it, let's even downplay mine. Let's leave mine out of it. Here we are, a very unique constitution, that says the board of trustees of the party has powers over all other organs. Every decision terminates on the table of the board of trustees. Our constitution is very unique. It's not in any way the same with what is tenable in other political parties in this country. Ours says that even the decisions of the NWC are subject to ratification by the BOT. And the BOT has the powers to call to order any officer of the party working at any organ, especially if the behavior of such an officer is found not to be in agreement with the provisions of the Constitution. And so it is laughable and funny, and that's why I dismissed it speedily, that the same NWC that is supposed to be subject to, checks and balances from the BOT turned around to say that the BOT chairman is suspended. That is from the administrative point of view. But from the moral angle, here is a man to whose house we went all the way in Umuawulu in Anambra State. They went on their knees begging, looking for a platform after they had tried the PRP and their court party. And because of their antecedents that are known, this tendency to want to grab where they have not sown anything, they came begging, and the man in his very gracious nature said, okay, no problem. What we're interested in is what we can do together so that the party can make progress. Okay. And then the man said, without any strings, he said, okay, let's go ahead. And where we are now, this is the result. This is the only thing they owe the man.
Mr. Major,
so even if they have any...
Mr. Major, I just want to get something clear. You say that the Constitution was not followed. You say that the due process for suspension was not followed. And then you say that it's only the Board of Trustees that can ratify this decision of the National Working Committee. Is that right?
Yeah, what I'm trying to let you know is it's not expressly the way you are putting it. What I'm saying is, yes, if you look at the Constitution, these decisions could be taken at the interim level by the NWC and then ratified by the neck of the party. And but that this entire process terminates on the table of the Board of Trustees. That's what.
But how about the allegations against you? Are you aware about the allegations against you?
Well, what I had them read out after the meeting, of course, I was at that meeting halfway. It was when I saw that they already had their minds, focused on what they wanted to do. I discovered they had had a meeting before yesterday's NWC meeting, and they seemed to have agreed on what they wanted to do. I'm
asking, what are the allegations against you, and how do you respond to them?
It is just not, it's unfounded. What they said is that I did anti-party, and I can tell you that they can't substantiate that. They don't have anything in their hands to show that I did anything that has the semblance of anti-party.
Okay.
They don't have any other thing against me other than that they claim I did anti-party.
Very well then. So we have Mr. Ladipo Johnson in the studio, who is the chairman of the disciplinary committee. So let's hear from him with regard to all the things you've said. You've sat here and listened to him, and I've seen you shake your head a number of times. What do you disagree with?
Well, unfortunately, thanks for having me. Good evening. Unfortunately, I feel my friend and brother has intentionally misled you. Whilst it is true that there are certain procedures. The suspension was under Article 39.6(2), which, may I read it, says nothing in this article shall prevent the National Working Committee from suspending a member of the party against whom disciplinary proceedings are pending before any organ of the party. The suspension must not be more than 12 months. Now, and then the article goes on to talk about circumstances if you feel that, for instance, it's going to bring the party into disrepute. And I'm glad he says it, that he was at the meeting. He was at the meeting. And the gentleman didn't even talk about the so-called, he's talking about the magnanimity of Dr. Anibunam. At that meeting, he didn't say one word to protect the man. It was about himself, protecting himself. But that aside, the board is advisory. No board of trustees, it is the NEC that is the highest organ of the party. Taking decision-wise. The NEC operates through the National Working Committee. Now, even if you're chairman of the board, which we say you are not, but let's say you are chairman of the board, common sense makes it clear that you cannot individually, solely, write letters to people outside the party saying that you have reversed decisions of NEC and of the working committee. It's as simple as that. Forget the anti-party or what have you. Forget the publicity secretary. The man, we respect him, Dr. Anibuna, we respect him. But this thing has gone on for a while, and the fact that you welcomed people in to a party that you're part of the founders, fantastic. Well, does that mean that you operate outside the Constitution?
What's the procedure for suspension?
I read it out to you.
Did you follow the procedure?
Of course. There are different procedures. There's one when you notice something, someone writes a petition, it goes on a different route. This one, it's like an offense in the face of the court, because his letters that went out came directly to the working committee as well. And members of the party kept complaining that, look, this thing must stop. Several meetings, even between himself and Senator Kwankwaso. Several meetings. And we respect him, I always say it. We respect him. But if you are used to running a party as a sole proprietor, it is different now. It is a national party. And that is the main problem. It is a national party, and you cannot single-handedly say that you're reversing decisions. You can, as a board of trustees, even if you don't read the Constitution, board of trustees, you should be able to call anyone, say, hey, National Working Committee, don't treat these people this way. Well, let's talk about it.
Just to get your closing statement, with regard to his position, and I believe that may be the position of Dr. Anyebunam, what's the party's next move? Because they don't accept the position. What's the suspension?
Look, the suspension is only for 3 months. And I take it that when passions have cooled, and Dr. Anyebunam looks at everything going on and doesn't look at it as if he has been affronted, this matter will probably be settled before the 3 months. But the bottom line is that the working committee felt that enough was enough. We had to put a stop to what was going on.
And they remain suspended.
As at tonight, yes, they do. So if he thinks it's a joke, it's left to him to joke about it.
Mr. Major, you've listened to the chairman of the disciplinary committee. What's your next action? Do you accept the suspension at this point, or do you have a next line of action to take, perhaps the courts?
Okay, my reaction. Well, it's unfortunate that Barrister Johnson, Ladipo Johnson, is speaking this way. First, let me let him understand that the constitution that he has in his front there, under the article that deals directly with the constitution of the Board of Trustees, the first item there says that the founder of the party is a life member of the Board of Trustees. Taking only that article makes all that they have done void.
But this is
void
just a suspension.
God bless you. There's a difference, my brother, between saying someone should leave the party.
He cannot be suspended.
Interestingly, we're out of time. We're out of time, and we'd have to talk about this some other time. So I'd like to thank both of you for your time here, Mr. Ladipo Johnson and Mr. Agbo Major. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's Politics Today. Thanks to you as well for your time. I'm Terry Ikumi. And good, it's Friday.